Hi there, welcome back to Paying It Forward. In the video this week, we're going to be looking at something that's really close to my heart, which is using automation to improve the productivity of an engineering team inside of Azure DevOps. Automation, you might ask. In this particular case, we've been using Power Automate, and I want to show you 3 of my best examples. Let's take a look. One of my favorite ways that I first used Power Automate in terms of how to manage Azure DevOps more effectively was actually using forms to manage the project creation process for a form, so that, let's say, the stakeholders that you would have who are requesting projects in Azure DevOps to be created, you have an automated way of doing that, but still with the control that you're looking for that you would normally use. So this is kind of a visualization of how that process works, is that you have a stakeholder or a user requesting a project for a form. You then manage that, let's say, the data needed from that form through Power Automate, and then you use API calls within Power Automate to then generate the project. Shall we take a look? Let's do it. There are a couple of required data that you need when it comes to creating a project. That is the project name, the project description, and also you need to have the process as well that you're going to create the project under. You'll see when we come into creating the flow in Power Automate that there's a couple of steps that you have to factor in terms of to get that kind of information. What I think will work best in relation to how we do this is to take it step by step and actually build the flow out together. So let's start by creating an automated cloud flow, and this will be triggered based on when the form is submitted, and we'll just give it a name for now, so new. So we're going to take that form that we've just created, and we're going to do that get response details from the form. The first thing we need to do is to be able to return the process IDs that are within the organization. So we're going to set that up here. So I'm going to create a new step, and I'm going to put in Azure DevOps here. I'm going to send a HTTP request, and I'm going to do a get. And then, as you can see in the documentation here, there is a list of the processes that are within the organization. So I'm going to take the HTTP reference that's mentioned on this page. I'm going to copy it, bring it back to my HTTP request and paste it in. And then I'm going to delete the information that's not needed, which we already have at the start of the API call. So we now have the ability to return the processes. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to run a quick test. So you can see the flow is running. And we've been able to return 4 different processes there. If I just go into here, you can see a little bit more clearly on the screen. If we just come over to the right hand side here, you can see that we have a number of different things that are returned, which is the ID of the process mentioned here, the description, the type, and the URL and the name. So one of the things we need to be able to do is we need to be able to pass this information here, because we need to be able to use that in the later steps when it comes to creating the project. So what I'm going to do based on that completed process is that you can see I have the body here of the output. I want to copy this body, and then I want to use it to create a parse JSON step. And the reason for this is that I need to be able to extract the values that will be used later on within the process. So I'm going to take the body, generate from sample, use the payload that I've just got from the previous step. And you can see I now have an example. And then if I do a quick compose step, I can validate the information that I've got from the previous step. So in this case, I'm just going to take the name of the process, give it a quick test, and we can now open up this step and we can see that we're returning the names of the processes. So this is good to see that we've been able to do that step so far. All right, so what I want to do next is remove that compose step and actually build a condition in here. And what I want that condition to be is that when the name is equal to what's returned in the response, so if you have the name of the process that would be leveraged, then it will basically select that one instead. And the reason for this is that we need to understand which process we're going to use when it comes to actually creating the project. So this is the name of the project. And then if that is true, we're going to then capture the ID of the process. So in a separate step, because I think it's always good to isolate these parts. So you can see here, we can then, based upon the values of the JSON that have been passed, I want to capture the process. Just going to rename this. And then we're going to use the final piece here is to do a HTTP call. And this one is unlike the other one, which was a GET. This is going to be a POST. And what we're going to reference here is the instructions that are in the create a project API reference. It tells you the example that you can use here and also what the body should contain in this example that was mentioned at the bottom here. So we're going to take the sample, come back to the flow, paste it in, remove the details that we don't need, and then we also need to configure the body. We're going to take the sample body, paste it in here, remove this information because that's already included, and then we want to dynamically incorporate the other components. So here we have the name, which we want to pass from the actual submission in the beginning, the name of the project. Here we want to pass the description, which is the description that we got from the beginning. And then we want to leverage that process template so we ensure that it's on the right process. So we're going to take the outputs of the previous step, which was the ID of the process. And now we have everything that we want in that. All right, so let's give it a test based on filling in the form again. We're going to submit a new response. And we're going to come here and we're going to call this paying it forward CMMI. Hit that one, submit. And then we'll come back here and we'll see that it triggers the flow to start and it runs successfully. So we can look through, we can see that we've returned the 4 values, we've passed that, we've then come into the condition, and you can see that in this case it's mentioned as true, captures the process ID, creates the project, and then you can see it references the process ID, the name of the project, and the description. Let's come over to Azure DevOps to take a look. Okay, so we land in Azure DevOps. We can see we have a new project here. If we click into the project and check the settings, we can see that it's leveraging the CMMI process, and we have a description of the project and the name. Pretty cool, right? So let's do one final thing to add the icing to the cake in relation to the process. Let's come back and let's add an extra step at the end, which is to confirm to the submitter that their project has been created. If you know me, I love to use adaptive cards. So let's post an adaptive card in Teams to them. So we're going to add a step. Search for Teams. Posting a card in a chat or a channel. Chat with the Flowbot. And then we're going to dynamically select the recipient as being the responder's email who made the submission in the first place. I think what would be cool is to use ChatGPT to generate the adaptive card. So let's give it a prompt. So what I've asked for is to generate me an adaptive card, center aligned, following information, project name, description, process name, and a link to the button that can be clicked. Last thing is to say return this as a JSON schema. All right, so we've got a nice little card there created. So we're going to copy the code. We're going to come back to check to see if it looks right. So let's come over to adaptive cards and take a look. We're going to come to the designer, select a new card, a blank card, change it to the Teams host app, and we're going to target version 1.3 because that's the one that's, let's say, quite basic. So you can see here a very simple information. I'm going to say, instead of calling this access project, I'm going to say click to open your new project. Yeah, so, and that looks nice. We're going to copy the payload, bring that back here, insert the adaptive card, and we're going to start going through and changing some of the information. So here we've got the project name, going to change that to what was returned in the response, which was the project name. We're going to put in the description here of the project. Always finding the button is sometimes a challenge. This is the description. We're going to put in the name of the process. And then last but not least, we're going to have a URL. And you might be wondering, how do we generate the URL? It's a little bit easier than you think. So what it would be is if we go to the project, you can basically see in the URL, if I just come up to the top here and we have a look, you can see that we have the dev.azure paying it forward and then the name of the project that comes after it. So what we need is up till here, basically, in the name. So we're going to select that. Come back into here, put that in there, and then at the end of the URL, we're just going to add the project name again, based on what was submitted. So I think we're in good shape. Let's give this a test. We're going to submit a new request. We're going to use the Scrum process, submit it. You can see that the flow is running. And if we open up Teams, we can see we've just got a new card. And here we have the new example project. We can click to open it, and then we can see we have our new project. So this completes the first example. Let's move on to the next one. The next example we're going to talk about is using Power Automate and adaptive cards to provide a notification of when there's a pull request within an Azure DevOps repository. Depending on what that may be about, we're going to use a little example to do that. But as you can see, the flow of that would be Azure DevOps triggering something in Power Automate that will then send a message in Teams. So let's take a look. All right, so we're going to start directly within Power Automate, building an automated cloud flow. And if you just search for a pull request in the search bar, you'll see that when a pull request is created, and we're going to add a name, pull request notifier, and hit create. And it asks me for a couple of details. So if we just pop on over to the project to have a look. So we're going to use the Peter project that we worked with on a previous video. And we're going to go in and check the repo. And the name that we're going to use is going to be the Peter repo. So let's find that in our flow. So we're going to pick the organization name, the project, which is Peter, and then the repository name, which is Peter. So we're going to add one other step just to confirm what we get back from this. We're going to use the compose step. And then we can see what reviews we get. We get the repository name, the commits user email, the repository ID, and quite a lot of different stuff, in fact. So I'm curious what the title of the pull request would be. So let's pass that back through and rename this step. Okay, so we're going to give this a save, and then let's give it a test. So to test this, I've created a new branch, which you can see here for the documentation, which is called new documentation. And I'm committing this contents.markdown file into the repository. So I'm just going to come to source control, stage my change, and make a commit. I'm going to use GitHub Copilot to do that. Add contents to repo, hit complete, publish the branch. And then I'm going to come over to Azure DevOps and take a look at this. So I'm in Azure DevOps. I can come to my commits, and I can see there's a new commit that's come here, and I want to create a pull request. So I've given my pull request a title, add contents to repository, Peter, has all the usual information in it. Not going to select any reviewers for now. I don't have any. And just checking the details, hit create. And now we should get, our flow should run. Okay, so as you can see, it took a little while longer than usual, but we've triggered the flow. We can see the outputs that we get back here. And if we just zoom in a tad, so we can kind of have a look at the details. We can see quite a lot of details. You can see the title, the description of the pull request, the URL, merge ID, a bunch of other information. Who would be on the reviewers list, for example, is something that could be quite useful or interesting, and who it was created by, and which repo, and so on and so on. So we get quite a lot of information that we could use later on in our flow. And in this case, we want to use some of that information to inform the stakeholders within teams that there's something new for them to review. And we're going to create a new Teams adaptive card message. Okay, we're going to post a card in a chat or a channel. In this particular case, we're going to do it in a channel, and it will ask which channel we want to do it in, which is the Contoso team in the general channel, and then it's asking for the adaptive cards. Let's go generate another quick one. So I've just made a small prompt generating an adaptive card based on that I can pass through Power Automate to communicate to the team the new pull request, include key information like name of PR, description, who needs to review it, any other key information, and prepare it in JSON format. So again, we have a fairly basic adaptive card, but that's good. And we can quickly take a look at what it looks like. So we're back in the designer and we're going to paste in the payload that we have. And you can see it's a fairly basic card, but it gives a bit of a nice overview of what would be there. We're going to copy the payload, paste this into the flow, and let's get the key information that we need to have in there. So we're going to update here with the new PR name. We're going to put in the description. We're going to add in who created the PR, and then we're going to add a link to the PR. So one thing I just found out when testing the flow is that the URL that's passed in the URL field here is not useful for us. It doesn't actually take us to the URL. So what we're going to do is create a URL dynamically based on some information that we have in here. If we take a look at the URL, what we can see is that it's made up of a URL and then with the number of the pull request mentioned here, which is in this case a number 1. So what we can do is we can form the URL here instead. So we're going to change the URL to being the link together with dynamic content, which would be the ID of the pull request. Like this. So the ID should be a 1. And if we test this one, we can see that we have the message here inside of Teams with the link to the pull request. And if we click to open it, it takes us directly to the pull request. So this is another cool technique to use Power Automate on top of your Azure DevOps data to be able to, create notifications and kind of inform your teams as they're managing their engineering projects. Let's look at the next one. The last section we're going to look at is something I call work item hygiene. And this is based on something that we have, let's say, a need for within the teams that I work in Microsoft, which is we want to make sure that the work items that people have assigned to them are kept up to date, and making sure that if any updates haven't been made to them, that we're able to kind of remind people. So we use queries inside of Azure DevOps to obviously identify those work items, and then we run Power Automate on recurrence to help communicate those to those certain team members to be aware of the work that they have to update. In terms of how the flow goes, we have the queries inside of Azure DevOps that identify the specific information we want. We then have a recurring flow inside of Power Automate that runs every week, and that then sends a message with all of the information that that person has to update to them in Teams. Let's take a look. Okay, so in this example, I'm setting up my sprint because we have a certain deadline, which is the 17th of November, and I want to track these specific stories. So I'm going to drag them all over into this sprint, which is good. So I now know which work items are in the current sprint. And then I'm going to build a query. So what I'm looking for in this particular example is any changes that were made that's less than the start of the day minus 1 day. When I run this query at the moment, I get no results because it's all of the items that I've created in this example I did today, apart from some of the others. So if I remove the iteration, then you can see that it shows up the items that were created a little while back. And if I change this from 1 day to 7 days, which is really what I would like it to be, you'll see that they don't show up because I did these last week. So if I'm just going to do for now 5 days, they'll stay up there. But I'm going to keep it like this for now, just so we can return items in the query. But the idea would obviously be that if there's nothing that's been changed in a period of time, then you obviously want to highlight that. I used, just for information purposes, to get the iteration that you want to have. You type in the iteration path, and then you select the current iteration and which team it would be based within. And that will then, as you can see, returns nothing in this particular case. So now I have this query, I can save it, and I'm going to put, and we're going to save this into the shared queries. And what we'll now do is we're going to go into Power Automate and create this flow that will then run this query so we can identify these work items. All right, so like I was saying, I'm going to give it a name, scheduled work item hygiene checker, and I'm going to repeat this once a week on every Wednesday to highlight to people that they need to update their items. I'm going to do it at 10 a.m. And the first step I'll do in here is I'm going to go to Azure DevOps. And then if you type in the query, it's going to be get query results. So what I can now do is I can select the organization, the project that I'm working in, and I can then search for the query, and we can see we saved it in the shared queries. Save it. And then what we're going to do is give this a quick test. So if you remember when we were looking at this a moment ago, we should return free work items. Let's have a look at the outputs. So what you can see is we get back the free work items that were mentioned, an epic, feature, and a task. One of the issues, as you can see here, is there's not a lot of detail in the query about these, about each of these, and you might be wondering, how do I get more information? So how you do this is if we come back to the query, the information that's passed through in the query is based on the number of columns that are created inside of the query. If I add some additional columns, and I add some things in here like the created date, description, and due date, then I can also then save this query. If I come back to Power Automate and then edit, I'm going to do a quick refresh. And now I'm going to test it again. So if I now go to the outputs, you can see that I get additional information like the created date passing back through as well. All right, so now we've got the query results. The important thing to note here is that this comes back as an array, and that's like good and all, but it's not going to be very helpful when we try to put it into adaptive cards, because the challenge will be is that we're going to end up sending, let's say if one person has a data quality requirement or a hygiene within their work item, they're going to get multiple notifications for each one of the data quality issues that they would have, and that doesn't really give a great experience. So one of the approaches that I researched, again, this is one approach that you could take to doing this, is that I pass all of the fields that I want to present to the user in a string, and then I include those inside of an adaptive card. And so I'm going to show you the way in which you construct that string so that you can kind of follow along and see kind of how it all works. I then used ChatGPT to do additional formatting on the string so that I can actually, make it look even nicer when it comes to presenting it to the user in the adaptive card. So if I open up the apply to each step, which I've got here, I've created the compose step, but I'm just going to kind of show you how it would look like as we go through it together here. So I'm going to form the compose step to create the string based on adding an expression. So I'm going to open the expression, open the concatenate function, and then for each dynamic value I pass, I need to put a comma after each. So let's take the title, comma, and then we're going to take the state, the date it was created, and then the change date. So I've now joined all of those together in one single string. So if I present that back now, I would get that back as a single string, and it would not have any formatting in it. So if I just take this string here, I can basically, I'm going to take the string. So what I've done here in the prompt to ChatGPT is I've asked, using Markdown, I'll obviously format the output of the string so that we can get back a better result. And you can actually do that directly within the string. So we're going to submit this. You can see the first response that it's given back isn't quite correct. So I'm giving it additional context that it needs to keep the formatting within the expression as it's used inside of Power Automate. So you can see now that it's revised the expression, and you can see it's using the double stars to make something bold, and then collecting each of the items and using the N to create spaces between each section. So if I copy this across and then I paste it in, you can see that the formatting now is a bit more dynamic and looks a bit more presentable in terms of what we'd get back when we were presenting the string. It also saves as well. So now I'll just show you the version of that I ended up going with, which is that I have the title, the work item type, the state, the created date, the change date, and the URL. And what I did with the URL, like I did with one of the similar exercises previously, was I took the URL of let's say a general work item, and then I just added the ID of the work item at the end, just to dynamically generate it rather than having to do this separately. What I then do is I take the output of the compose step, because of course each time you're composing the output of the query through this concatenation, we need to then join that together for each query result that we're getting back. So if we have 4 query results, we need to append them into a single string. So in this case, we're appending it to a string variable, which I'm just taking the outputs from the compose step. The name of the variable that I created at the start was the work item title. And then last but not least, I've created a basic adaptive card here, which basically says that there's a work item hygiene report. There's some information that's been in the current sprint that hasn't been updated for more than 5 days. The way in which you create the string that we've created through the variable by appending each of those compose steps. If you use a text block when you're designing your card inside of adaptive cards, then you can basically place the string inside of it and it will then render that part of the information in the card. In addition to that, I'm also then creating some additional links underneath for where they can go to the board to update the outputs. Also a place where they could submit feedback, and then a place to show additional documentation within the card. These are just kind of, let's say, additional things that you can add, but it makes it look really good. Shall we give it a test? Let's do it. All right, so the flow is running, and then you can see here that I have my work item hygiene report. Some of the cool things that are contained within here is that you have the title of each of the work items that needs to be adjusted, which work item type it is, what the state is, what the created date was, and when it was last changed. You can also then dynamically press into the work item to be able to take the action that you need to be able to update it. Down below there's a section for documentation so that you can even put your own description or steps to update the card here as well. I'll include the adaptive card schema in my GitHub repo so that if you want to go and access and leverage this one that I've designed for this kind of card, you can definitely feel free to do that. Thanks a lot for watching the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care and see you next week.